With the release of Witch Queen came a flood of sandbox updates that would significantly shift the meta for the rest of the year. Among these was the 40% increase to exotic primary weapon damage and a 10% nerf to Ward of Dawn, reducing its damage buff from 35% down to 25%, which is now on par with the Well of Radiance. Since this nerf, we've seen a continuous evolution of DPS methods in an attempt to make up for this loss in damage. And there are other alternatives, of course, including Banner Shield, which still provides a staggering 40% damage buff, but you almost never see it used because the math just doesn't make sense to lose one person to Divinity and another to Banner Shield. If you're only having 4 people damage at any given time, the numbers just don't add up, which is why you see Well of Radiance with a Divinity be the primary DPS meta for most fire teams. Lumina is quickly becoming an extremely valuable piece of the ever-evolving DPS puzzle. It single-handedly provides a 10% higher damage buff than Well of Radiance without sacrificing a second teammate during DPS like Banner Shield does. And when used correctly, it can make the difference between leaving a boss one-shot and securing that kill. I know we've all been in situations where that little bit of extra damage would have been the difference. I'm Above, and if you enjoyed today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Now, let's get into it. For those who aren't familiar, Lumina is a 140 RPM hand cannon focused purely on support play. On kill, it generates remnants that convert to noble rounds when you pick them up. These rounds, when shot at your teammates, not only begin health regen, they also provide a damage buff called Blessing of the Sky. This buff is a hefty 35% damage bonus that lasts for 10 full seconds and applies to both you and your teammates. With that said, if you're in a raid setting, you'll need to buff each individual fire team member at the start of DPS, as this is a 1-to-1 damage buff. Now, this may sound tedious, but it's actually super easy to do. Lumina produces 2 noble rounds on each kill, and since you can only hold 5 in reserve at any given time, you're generating way more noble rounds than you can even use. This opens up an insanely fun support playstyle that constantly heals and buffs your fire team. Now, there are probably some of you in the comments who will say, "Above, I've been using Lumina since the day it was released, bro." And to that I'll say, let's be real. It's always been a decent gun, but it's probably been sitting in your vault for several years at this point. After all, why would we use it prior to Witch Queen when all we had to do was step in and out of a bubble for the same benefit? Let's dive into a side-by-side comparison on Oryx, one where we're using Lumina and one where we're not. There are obviously several factors that can impact your team's overall damage output, but we mirrored this setup as closely as possible across both damage phases. Each phase utilized Well of Radiance, Divinity, Font of Might, Bait and Switch, and Boss Spec on our Cataclysmics. The only difference between the 2 damage phases was the use of Lumina, where the 35% Blessing of the Sky buff will override Well of Radiance. With Lumina equipped and all of our buffs stacked together, we hit for 149,239 per shot. And without Lumina, that number drops to 138,184 per shot. Now, this is still a crazy high number, but when you spread this loss in damage across 5 people, excluding our Divinity user, you're losing out on over 55,000 damage per second as a fire team. It takes roughly 10 seconds to proc Bait and Switch and then shoot 10 shots of Cataclysmic with 4 times the charm procs. Blessing of the Sky is also a 10-second buff, which lines up perfectly here. Assuming we don't reproc Blessing of the Sky after the first magazine, your team is losing out on 550,000 damage, which is 100,000 more damage than a Star Eater Scales Golden Gun at ×4 Feast of Light. This may not seem like a game-changing number, but it's free damage and can absolutely be the difference between one-phasing a boss and leaving them at 1 HP, which I think we've all been through before. Anyways guys, I'll let both damage phases play out in the background, the first without Lumina, and the second utilizing Lumina to secure that clean one-phase kill. That's it from me. Drop a like and subscription if you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!